So I'll start off with you, Anshik, actually. If you could tell us a little bit about how Cisco is thinking about innovation. You're clearly a global company. You're not a gorilla in your own space. How do you all innovate? How do you all think about the next big idea? Right. Even $1 billion is not much for Cisco, right? So what is the big $1 billion idea?
With the rupee at $60 billion is something. Well, most of all that goes on within Cisco under the large umbrella of innovation is in some sense business driven. We are, in our narrative, finding three large trends that is shaping the world, and our innovation is actually driven by that. In the primary role, we're seeing that there is a huge shift in social demographics. There is a part of the world which is aging and shrinking significantly, and by that we mean the European continent. Europe today has 700 million people. It will shrink down to about 600 million people by the year 2050. And by contrast, there is a part of the world which is seeing hypergrowth. Countries like India and China and West, but a large part of the African continent too, and large parts of Latin America. The second narrative for us is this huge emergence of the mobile internet and everything available to everyone on the go. And that, we think, will spur a lot of entrepreneurial spirit and innovation. That's the second portal that we are focusing on. And the third is an economic narrative wherein our premise is that the consolidated GDP of the emerging countries now outstrips the consolidated GDP of what was hitherto called the developed world, and read that as Western Europe, the North American continent, and Japan. Consequently, the narratives of what is innovation today is changing on its head. And we tend to look at innovation with these three lenses, and we find what the technology underpinnings are that could further bolster Cisco's presence in these markets. Increasingly, we are not focused on market share. We're focused on what the transition is and what's likely to happen, and how is it that we can be ahead of the curve. Just as an anecdote, there was a study that actually was done by Harvard Business School for Cisco, and Cisco partnered with them. And the conclusion was that if Cisco listened to what their customers said, then we would not have done anything. Almost all innovation that Cisco took and spurred within the market came through either internal ideas or external ideas. Cisco is a big believer in internal innovation, but equally looks at soliciting ideas from around the world. And it could be from anybody outside of Cisco who is free to contribute ideas within Cisco, and Cisco will take that on. But I'll pause. I suspect the discussion will morph and we can respond.
Some of those models. I prepped the audience with a request that you jot down some of the questions you have. We'd like to make this interactive, so as this discussion prompts some thoughts in your mind, please put that down. We'll set aside a good chunk of time for question and answers. So Shekhar, your whole business, you're an early stage investor, right? Your whole business is to figure out signal from noise, right?
Yeah.
And if you don't, you're actually going to be out of a job, right? Tell us how you're going about doing that. How do you take your bets?
Yeah. So the good news in VC industry is, it takes 10-year cycle. So you don't know what you're doing right or wrong for 10 years. So at least, out of job is like, 10-year cycle. That's the good news in VC industry. The challenge for us is, we see around 1,500 companies per year, and we invest around 10. And these 1,500 companies, come to us in various forms, through references, through the email, through the conferences, and through accelerators, and quite a lot of inbound. And we are kind of a narrow tech-enabled investor. We invest in technology-led, IP-led companies only. So how do we filter out this? And some of the companies are global in nature, which means attacking global markets. They're a bit easier to validate, but some are India-focused. So for India-focused, for us, it comes down to how I can break down the India GDP. So I break down to kind of 4 buckets. There is 10 million people in India. This is what all of us are. Most of the things you are aware of today. Anything I talk about, Flipkart, Myntra, Zomato, Book My Show, Redbus, all of them are attacking this 10 million. Then there is a slightly extended another 50 million, which is the second set where there's a buying power, but not yet technology, internet savvy. They're buying automobiles, buying 4-wheelers. That's a second category. Then there is an 150 million, which is bread and butter, they have a TV, they have a bank account. Outside of that, it is pretty much rest of that is a billion plus people. So when ideas come, we have to quickly match whether the ideas are targeting this 10 million or a 50 million or 150 million or outside, and are they using the unit economics? Are they trying to sell an idea that they charge for a 10 million people for the rest of the world, or they're taking for, that two equations very quickly, the unit economics and where the target, we can quickly figure out whether the idea has got legs or not. Once then we can go deep and see whether they can execute, distribute, market it, IP, defensibility, quite a lot of things. But this first construct itself, we can filter out quite a lot of companies.
And I assume you're open to investing in all the three buckets, right?
We are investing in all the three, in fact, there are investments in the fourth bucket as well.
Got it. Tamoru-san, what do you think? You're an outsider who's arrived in India more recently. What do you see in the landscape here? Do you see opportunities? Do you see challenges? I'm sure you see challenges. What do you see as opportunities?
Probably headquarter of Hitachi watches some opportunity in India. But to me, especially after living here in Bangalore, I'm seeing some necessity here in this country.
Necessity?
Necessity, yeah. I've shown some items from India. I love those things, and I love this country. And I enjoy several places, including like Ajanta Ellora, and also deep inside of Orissa Temple. I enjoyed it. And after enjoying such kind of things, some concern came up to me. That is 1 billion of people. I mean, in front of Indian leaders, I have a request to you. Please love your country and please work for India. That's my request from outsider's point of view. Let me show you an example. That is 5 decades ago, Japan suffered from pollution, mercury, polluted water by mercury, and many people died. Actually died, not only suffered from pollution, actually died. Of course, it's a disaster. And it was because of mercury water pollution, and we did not have enough facility to clean up water before we dump such kind of hazardous material. And how about India? Last October in Bangalore, finally, we've implemented a garbage segregation system to segregate hazardous material like battery, copper, or mercury, or those kinds of things. But is it working? I'm afraid not. Then, sorry to say this, but the water in this country, including Bangalore, should be polluted. And some people may be dying at this moment already. I'm afraid, those things are happening again in this country after we suffered from such kind of serious problem in Japan. Then in a sense, I feel kind of duty and responsibility to work for this society, understanding such a problem in the past, and we have technology, and so I'd like to work for this country, and let's love this country, and let's work for this country. And in this kind of event, on the stage especially, sometimes conversation goes to like only top 5% of people to the American customer or American headquarters or those kinds of things. And please do not forget about remaining 1 billion people. And they are on the street, they are outside of the street. Thank you. And that's why I'm here, and that's why I'm on this stage, and I have a request, and you have a power, you have a capability, you have organization, and let's work on that. That's my request. That's my perspective of this country. I love this country.
Thank you. Okay. Good. So you call out to there's a lot of opportunity in the basic necessities of life.
Yeah. Beyond the business.
Good.
Yeah, so you mentioned the opportunity, but the necessity is here, I think.
Necessity, as opposed to great. Alok, you're a little further up the chain in terms of investments generally, right, than Shaker is. But how do you look at it? I'm sure you're pretty early stage still.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you mentioned earlier, we are in business because there is noise in the system, right? That's why we get paid a premium. Otherwise, if it's all signal, then
one of the filtering guys.
Yeah, we are the filters, right?
Yeah.
So I think one thing that we do is we abstract the problem, right? So we say, I don't know whether the solution is going to work or not, but let me see if this team is the right team, to make it work, if something will work. So just like, you go to a TripAdvisor and you look at a hotel rating, you don't know how your room is going to be, you don't know how your food is going to be, but you say if the hotel generally is good, then likelihood is that I'll land up with the right outcome. So I think that's what we do with the teams of saying, is this the right team for the business? So that if someone's going to win, chances are this team will play well, right? I think the second thing that we do is, approach, market inwards, right? And that allows us to understand whether the problem that they're going after is real and is it large enough.
So when you say market inwards, what do you mean by that?
So let me take an example, right? We invested in a company called iYogi 6 years back. The company scaled up tremendously, and they were solving a very simple problem of providing multi-platform, technical support to consumers. That business has been done, for donkey's years in the enterprise space, right? So it's not a new problem from a, delivery standpoint. But it hasn't been delivered to consumers, it hasn't been personalized, it hasn't been dealt with in a multi-platform sense, so you get Windows support separately, you get Apple support separately. And it was interesting what happened when we went into the market and talked to people on the business, right? Everyone we spoke to in the market, which, for them happens to be US, said, we know we can generate business for this, we're not sure whether we can deliver on this, right? So the delivery is the key bottleneck. Interestingly, we came back and we spoke to tech support companies in India and said, we don't know whether we can generate business for this or not. We know whether we can deliver on it if we generate the business, right? So, just looking at different pieces of business and getting feedback from the market on it, can help us wrap our arms around what is the real risk in the business, right? And that's really the way of us trying to make a better call on signal versus noise than necessarily just picking the signal up.
But as venture capitalists, you're more often wrong than you're right?
That's not entirely true. That's not entirely
not
true.
true? Okay.
I think that there is a perception that we are more often wrong than right. Unfortunately, the numbers don't work if we continue to do that. So, in India, the data around this is still fairly nascent. In the US operations, a top quartile venture fund like us, who's been around for 20, 25 years, for us, data is that about a third of our deals will bomb. About a third of our deals will return us money. So not stellar successes, but not loss. And a third is where we'll make money. So it is not a 1 in 10 business, even in the US market, which
The top tier firms at least.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Suman, how about yourself? How are you all thinking about disruptive technologies, disruptive innovation at your company?
Well, I'm sort of being the last. I'm tempted to take a little contrarian view. So my first contrarian view is a personal experience of sitting in a room with two great men who possibly started a lot of this, what we're talking about. That was possibly the last time that Bill Hewlett and Dave Packard came on stage. So Dave Packard was, Bill Hewlett was he wasn't able to speak properly, and Dave Packard was in very advanced stages of Alzheimer, shaking terribly. So one of the questions that was asked to them was, so Bill and Dave, what were your business plan? And Dave Packard is a very tall man, even at that advanced age that he was very, very tall. So he leaned forward to look at Bill, who was then drooling. And he looked at Bill and said, Bill, did we have a business plan? And Bill vigorously shook his head and said, no, we did everything that we did to keep us going. Every day was a new day. That was a great learning for me, because one of the things that I realized what happens when you're in a corporate manager is that it's very easy. We sort of blame the bureaucracy for doing things when we suffer, but we exactly become bureaucrats. Somebody comes with an idea, I don't have time, I say, hey, can you put it in a business plan format and bring it to me for my... It's essentially saying, I'm putting you on to this last bucket of interest. Please go and figure it out. The job of a corporate manager, I think, is especially in the times of intense competition, is to find ways to rob Peter to pay Paul. There is no way you can, take the laws of physics. If we put it the topic that we're talking in the laws of physics, there's no way you can find the signal without amplifying the entire spectrum. And then you will find a pattern which will say, this is signal, this is noise. But what we try to do is exactly the opposite. We first try to do prioritization. Oh, let's prioritize. What will you prioritize? You haven't even amplified the stuff. So I think the best way, okay, and I know the next question that will come is that if you try doing all of that stuff, do you have the resources to make it happen? And I think you don't need a lot of resource. Because, it's like the way the mothers would put their fingers onto a food and find out if the food was cooked or not. You just need to make it happen. A little bit of a start, give it a little bit of a start, and they'll start realizing the signal amplification, and it automatically will start culling down the ones which are not ready. Now, the important thing for a manager is that you have to be brave enough to put your neck onto the block and say, I'm going to take the bet, because like what the friends from the venture funds are doing, you have to be the internal VC to be able to do it, and the price that you pay could be your career. There aren't any glories. I can tell you there aren't any glories. You don't make the $1 million like the friends in the VC, but the satisfaction that you would get to be able to nurture a business through. And so in Siemens, one of the big tasks that I have is continuously be able to look out in a simple framework of an Ansoff matrix, continuously be able to look outside of the existing market, existing business, and be able to find funds to microfund those ideas, and most importantly, find the right set of people who's going to drive those ideas. Because a good idea and a bad guy can be a disaster.
But is the corporate structure the right structure
No,
for doing that?
no, not at all. Not at all, especially with the focus on quarter earnings, etc. It's not. But then, that's the challenge. That's the beauty of the challenge. That's the landscape that I think a good corporate manager versus the best corporate managers will have to fight to still make it happen despite and in spite of the hurdles.
Right.
But it's not, so this is not going to happen, right? Because your price performance curve is strictly inferior to being an entrepreneur or a VC. Right? You're saying I'm taking the same amount of risk. I lose my job if I don't succeed. I don't have an upside. Why are the best corporate managers going to make it happen in corporate settings?
Well, it's a very good question, and I think it possibly goes beyond the economic incentives of money. The reason a best corporate manager would do it is for many reasons, and I think yes, of course, promotions and getting into a clearer path to the board is one of them, but there are other incentives, and I think a lot of that is the pride.
So at Cisco, I'll come back to you, Shekhar. At Cisco, to Alok's point, the corporate structure is not incented, right? The corporate manager is not incented to actually innovate in a disruptive way. There's no real, they don't feel the equity, sufficient equity in the deal, right? How do you all tackle that at Cisco?
There are some Cisco employees here. I better watch what I say. Arvind's here, and Arvind might agree or disagree. Close door session. So let's look at some big things that Cisco has done in the last, say, 10 years. One of the biggest things Cisco has done is that it's led the charge into the market in high-definition video, and what's called telepresence today, and I'm sure that all of you use it within your enterprises. If we had listened to our customers, Cisco would have never done telepresence. By the way, the idea for telepresence for Cisco did not come from within Cisco. It came as a program that Cisco runs called iPrize, and I'd invite you to go on to the Cisco website and look at it. Every time people are invited to contribute ideas into it, you can accrue yourself large sums of money in the idea it's accepted. So the idea of innovation or signaling and separating the noise from the signal happening within is no longer true. The way your incentive is that you're incented to take advantage of the market condition. And so long as you can punch that condition is likely to happen, much on the lines of what I referred to, 9 times out of 10, our experience has been that we've gotten some part of the trade and either morphing into something else or eventually getting there where we wanted to. Now, I came from General Electric, and there the view was that we first assess the market and we would do a lot of number crunching. And don't get me wrong, the business model is not wrong. By contrast, Cisco never does a market share analysis. We basically take a view and say, what's likely to be the next transition? How can we be ahead of the curve in that transition? And what innovation is needed to support that transition? To that, we tend to then segment our markets much in the lines of what Shekhar referred to. But we tend to do it at a global scale. The idea of doing it for the country is somewhat new. Therefore, we are incented, but the incentive is no longer limited to the narrative of path to the board. It could be market access, it could be doing something like that.
So Shekhar, in your previous life, before you were a venture capitalist, you were at Verisign, right?
Yeah.
Could you tell us what you did there, maybe?
So I'm diametrically opposite to what Suman says, and I don't believe that will work because it will start, but the patience required in a corporation is so long unless you already have a street credit inside the corporation where you're considered like a walking hero. Nobody is going to touch you. Then you can go and do those kind of things. But that limits to a very small segment of people. It has to be an organized way, a corporate has to do it, where it has to be made as like a Uber team or a lab or a funded for 5 years, no question asked. And there it has to be a premium. The employees have to apply, and to be part of that group has to be considered really good. So if you don't create that kind of an environment, the best of the best will not work on the future. And once you create that, you get people there, and if their failure has to be appreciated, not, just not only success. Because every attempt you're doing, you will get closer to a potential opportunity or at least a learning of the market. But this structure has to be funded at a corporate level. If BU is trying to do it, or on a side budget we are trying to do, it will be very people-based. If my manager walks away to another company, that whole program collapses. And that I have seen repeatedly in these large organizations. So I believe it has to be an organized way, and if we do it right, I think it has a tremendous potential.
So I agree, and the last part, that it is finally people-based. Whatever we do, whatever we talk, the entrepreneur or the corporate manager, at the end of the day, it is he or she who matters. But but the reason I took a contrarian view is because I think I agree that some organizations have been able to figure out a way of doing these institutionalized. But again, the moment you make it institutionalized, it becomes like an Indian Planning Commission. A lot of talk, very less output.
So Tomoru-san, Hitachi is a very large global conglomerate company, right? Tell us how you all do innovation. And, how do you move the needle at Hitachi?
Let me tell you, what can I say? My view about Hitachi, and actually each one of Hitachi workers have different kind of view, but let me share my view. That is, many people laugh at lousy marketing of Japanese companies, and Hitachi is not the exception. I've never seen a very good TV commercial message from Hitachi, even in Japan. And, but still Hitachi is making 120 billion US dollar.
120 billion despite bad marketing.
Yes, without marketing. And that's because we are working for the society. And even though we have a variety of business and teams and organizations, ultimately the goal of all people in Hitachi is like a social innovation, working for society, not for the business, not for the profit. Actually, we cannot think about that. and so if a problem happens, for instance, online system of bank stops, then everybody works for that. Without thinking about profit, without thinking about cost, without thinking about the life-work balance. We are workaholic, I understand it, and then we are proud of that. We are working for the society. And some people from Hitachi talk about profit, but it's just once a year kind of things. And in the daily base, we just work for our target. And for doing that, I have to love the target, objective, or object to work on, and then. I have the tendency of loving the object like I do have for India, and that's my motivation. And I love such kind of company of Hitachi, working for the society, not for the profit.
Very good. Alok, you earlier brought up the whole thing about being market focused, right? Being from the market in. But at the same time, we always hear this saying that the customer doesn't really know best for really truly disruptive innovation. How do you resolve that? I mean, if you hear the market too closely, you end up building clones and marginal improvements, not the true disruptors.
I think the question is what are you trying to hear back from the market, right? I think the market is pretty good at articulating problems, right? I don't think the market or consumers are good at articulating solutions, right? So I think that is kind of one way to resolve this. I don't think we go to the market saying, do you think this solution works for you? Unless the solution is in the market, in which case, of course, people have had experience with the solution. But I think the consumers are pretty good at articulating what problems they are facing. And then if you can marry that with the ability to solve that problem at the right price point, I think, that's kind of one bet worth taking, right? I think the market is also pretty good at giving feedback within pockets of areas, right? So if you ask about competition, if you ask about how people do things currently, if you talk about the profitability of certain solutions versus not, so people are extremely good at giving feedback on pointed questions rather than saying, does this company work or not? And really, if you look at the venture capital industry, most of us are not experts at any of those areas that we invest in, right? But essentially the method in the madness is to try and take all these pieces and hope and try and piece up a jigsaw puzzle, which is right once and twice. Yeah.
To the two venture capitalists here, we've seen a big trend towards crowdsourcing, the wisdom of the masses, Is that a possible, especially with new technologies now, the big social graph out there, the ability to reach literally billions of people in a very short span of time. Is that the way to maybe identify, kind of the gems from the stones, so to say?
Yeah, so again, if somebody came up with an idea, crowdsourced XYZ for us, very quickly I'll go back to my formula. Is crowdsourcing for 10 million people or 50 million people? If you look at all our e-commerce transactions today, everybody bought unique number of transactions that has happened in India is sub 10 million. People who have bought online is sub 10 million outside of the railway ticket. So this is 10 million people are online. They are telling about crowdsourcing idea, can I do this more Facebook likes or can I do this? It's all about this, a small India. So if your target is that, probably crowdsourcing would work. But asking these 10 million people for the rest of the billion people outside this 150 million, I'm not sure how much of idea you get. There will be too much noise. Okay, so the crowdsourcing has to be targeted from the crowd that understand the problem to be able to sift through and give us a better idea. Otherwise, whereas in US, where 300 million out of which at least 200 million plus are online, and various segments, average revenue per person is pretty high or income. So you will get a decent idea. But India is being such a drastic difference between the segments. It's almost impossible to kind of target the crowdsourcing.
I think it does, in another sense, I think the venture business is built all on crowdsourcing, right? We don't generate ideas. All the ideas come from the entrepreneurial crowd, right? Gets validated in the market to some extent. The notion of amplification that was presented earlier. All our due diligence is based on talking to, in a typical investment, 10 to 20 people, which is law of large numbers. You cap out at that. You don't get new insights by talking to 15,000 people. So I think the venture capital model, already relies heavily on wisdom of the crowds in some sense. I think for the corporate innovators, this is a relatively newer model which people have taken up to, and it might have a lot of value there.
I want to provide one small data point as context to what Shekhar said. So it's just an anecdotal point. Tell me, Ravi, what's the market of toothbrushes around the world? Toothbrushes.
You put me on the spot.
Pick a number.
We'll ask the audience. 2 billion? 7 billion?
Okay, so the total market for toothbrushes is 2.5 billion. 70% of India goes without a toothbrush.
Yeah.
But that's not the story. Now tell me, what's the market for cell phones? The cell phones is 6 billion. So everybody today pays more emphasis on getting a cell phone than getting a toothbrush. Chances are that you will have access to data and the internet before you have access to potable water. Chances also are that you will have a hugely burgeoning, young, strong middle class without access to positive use of the mental and support faculties that they bring. We believe that innovation increasingly will be targeted to counter these spaces. Should we choose to take a narrow view of what is the India access of the internet is somewhere between 110 million or so people are on the internet today in India, and of which I would say there are 30 million who are unique users, would use it just once or twice, and there are about a steady state users between 50 and 80 million people or so. The next set of people coming on the internet will want the internet in the vernacular, will want to understand context of what is relevant for their lives. Therefore, I think there is something that ought to be married in terms of the social demographics that are currently playing back at us, but that's just some context.